Hey everyone, welcome to Geneva's Tutoring Prep. I am happy to be here to just give you this new video that was requested by two amazing women. One I tutored, one I met as they are tutoring together or they're studying together for their exam. And they requested, let's do some family systems and because there's not a lot of material with that. So I want to give a shout out to Natasha and Penny. I know you say you watch my videos, so I'm going to assume that you watch this as well, but thank you for giving me this idea and this input. And I hope you enjoy the video and you learn from it. Comment, let me know what you think, but let's get into it. So the first question, and then also this information comes from Dr. Rosenthal's book, okay, Counseling Family Diagnoses. All right, so a married couple brings their two children to counseling for behavioral problems. The 14-year-old daughter stays out late, and their 17-year-old son is using drugs. According to most marriage and family therapists, the identified patient would be who? A, the 17-year-old son, B, the 14-year-old daughter, C, the family, or D, both children. I'll give you about a 5-second wait. So it would be the family. Most family counselors believe that the entire family system, which is a natural social system, is dysfunctional. Hence, the entire family is identified as the patient in the need of treatment. Traditionally, identified patient when seen as a person who is having the problem. Unfortunately, for insurance purposes, you may need to pick a family member to diagnose as the identified patient, even though this goes against what most family therapists believe. So you can't just truly pick one person out the family because that's what family therapy is for. And then we'll go over some of those theorists that talk about how it is important to focus on family communication, structure, you know, stand tears, etc. We'll go over those. You are seeing a husband and wife for marriage counseling. During one of the sessions, you decide to see them separately. The husband tells you he has seen an attorney because he's filing for a divorce. He has not told his wife and indicates that he will not do so. You feel the wife has a right to know this because it will help her plan for the future. You should. A, only tell his wife if he gives you permission. B, communicate his intent to his wife since ethic guidelines state you may do so when a member of a couple is contemplating divorce. C, tell the wife since research indicates that women respond more positively to divorce when they have less time to think about it. D, terminate the husband unless he tells her. Okay, A, right? Only tell his wife if he gives you permission. According to the ethics guidelines, counselors must not disclose information about one family member in counseling to another without prior consent. Could this situation happen in your caseload? So, going back to this question, you definitely want to make sure that you do not breach any confidentiality, and you have to look at your own internal biases with that. You are supervising a licensed candidate who is primarily interested in marriage and family counseling. You are very attracted to her and have sex with her. According to ethics guidelines, A, this is perfectly ethical since this is a student and not a client. B, this is unethical. C, this is perfectly ethical since this is a supervisee and not a client. Both A and C are correct. I'm going to assume you picked this as unethical. Very much so. Okay. The fast-growing clientele for professional counselors are persons A, experiencing bipolar disorder, B, experiencing suicidal ideation, C, experiencing marriage and family problems, D, who abuse their children. Experiencing marriage and family problems. Okay, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, AAMFT, see marriage and family therapists as a separate profession in of itself. The International Association of Marriage and Family Counselors is a division of the ACA and adheres to CAPE guidelines and believes that marriage and family counseling is a specialty mastered by an individual who has generic training and experience in counseling. Family counseling generally believes in A, circular or reciprocal causality, B, linear causality, C, random causality, and D, dream analysis. A, circular reciprocal causality. So, you want to take a look at circular causality. Circular causality, it looks at what is going on within the family itself, not just a linear between one person. So in family therapy, you're working with a family and you see that the boy argues with both parents, right? But then you also have to look at how the parents respond, then how the son responds, how the parent responds, and it could be a negative way of how they respond to each other that constantly creates this continuous loop, right? But if it's linear, right, it's generally accepted as a valid concept between the individual and the counselor, right? So, for example, here a person was physically abused as a child, so now that person becomes an abusive parent. That would be linear because that A impact B and B no longer impacts A in a sense, right? You're making your decision, your behaviors based on your experiences, but it's not a back and forth thing like it is with the circular causality. Okay. Cybernetics is a concept used by family therapists. It is usually associated with the work of A. Freud and Ellis, B. Norbert Wheeler, A. Virginia Satir, D. Behavioral family therapists and cognitive family therapists. Norbert Wiener. He pioneered the term cybernetics in the early 1940s. Okay. When you think of cybernetics is a sequence and cause effect that goes back and forth to the original or caused or confirmed it. In addition, looking at these examples, cybernetics, like I said, in the 1940s, Whitaker was asked to investigate how guns could be aimed to hit moving targets. He teamed up with a mathematician named John Newman. So long story short, cybernetics suggests that the family has feedback loop to self-correct a family system. A family that is stable and reaches equilibrium is in the state of A, adaptability, B, enmeshment, C, non-summativity, and D, homeostasis. Homeostasis. So Homeostasis is a term meaning balance, right? So you can have homeostasis, but it can also be not healthy. The balance is not healthy. For example, the family will attempt to hold a given pattern of function that could indeed be dysfunctional. So to say you have a good family balance and a bad family balance is the thing. Okay, that's equilibrium. Adaptability of the family to balance. Adaptability is the ability of the family to balance. A, ego strength. B, stability and change. C, morphostasis and morphogenesis. D, B, and C. So we have B and C. Okay. So stability and change, morphostasis and morphogenesis. If you look at stability, goes with morphostasis. I usually remember it by having STA. And then morphogenesis is change. Morphostasis is the ability of family to balance stability, while morphogenesis refers to the family's ability to change. A family wants to see you for counseling. However, they have very limited income and can't afford to pay. You therefore agree to see the family for free, pro bono. The term that best describes your actions will be A, aspirational ethics, B, mandatory ethics, C, empathy, or D, all the above. Aspirational ethics. So, long story short, you don't have to do pro bono. You can just refer to them somewhere else, but it's aspirational if you do so, right? When you think of, some people can't afford it, but you want to continue services. So aspirational ethics, on the other hand, describes the ideal or optimal practice. Mandatory ethics are often clear-cut and have no gray areas. Experimental conjoint family therapy is closely related to the work of Virginia Satir. So conjoint, if you just without the experimental, and you think about conjoint family therapy, it's combining two therapies together during a therapy session. So you might have two separate families during a therapy session. So a little bit about Virginia Satir. Virginia Satir is also known as experimental therapy. She has Satir transformational systematic therapy. The goal of her ST therapy is to improve relationship and communication within the family structure by addressing a person's actions and emotions and perceptions. Satir believed that all people possess a capacity to grow and transform as well as their education through life. All people are connected through the universe, what's called life energy, that can be accessed to achieve transformational change behaviors, and develop positive life energy. The goal of STST is to help raise self-esteem, become decision makers, become responsible, become congruent, meaning say what they mean and do what they say. In addition, that family can be healed with love. And you also talk about family sculpting. Okay, let's go to the next one. Also, Albert Ellis. We all know Albert Ellis. He's REBT. And then you have Jay Haley. Jay Haley is a strategic family therapist. A strategic family therapist believes problems don't lie within the system themselves, as we are social. Also talks about, Jay Haley talks about, which is a guy. I know some people assume this is a female. But Jay Haley talks about brief strategic family therapy. he did not believe, he actually got into an argument with Carl Rogers about how to work with people in therapy. Carl Rogers wants to look at like childhood, whereas Jay Haley said, no, we need to look at what is the presenting issues now and have brief strategic therapy because we don't need to go back into their childhood. So brief strategic family therapy develops specific approaches for each problem, slowly helps the client make the change in that area. Okay. And he also talks about circular causality as well. In addition, you have with Jay Haley, you talk about the first order change and second order change. First order change is what the family is doing at this point in time that they have been doing to cope with whatever issues they have or the temporary advantages that they have with the issues they have in the family. And then the second order change is more so what is working long term, though that's not as best and easy to see, but you want to have more long-term changes that's going to last over a longer period of time. Okay. Also, Jay Haley views the problem as an imbalance of power. So if you have a child and you have the parents, the child is feeling like they have to have power over the parents. The whole goal of, Jay Haley's brief therapy is to relieve the family of the symptoms that they are experiencing. Okay. So next, let's talk about munching. Okay. So Munchkin, who felt, he worked with the entire movement, right? And he also did some work as well with identifying how important it was for family to be able to see them as the whole totality, right? That they are not just individuals, they are whole beings, and you need to work with them in that sense, right? Can't just work with one person. Munchin felt that family therapy was science, requiring therapeutic intervention well beyond the warmth, right? You can't just, work with them and have all this amazing look within yourself, but you also have to look outside of that. And it has to be scientifically proven to work. Okay. Virginia Satir felt that a major goal of therapy was to improve intra-communication. According to Satir, 4 basic patterns prevented good communication under stress. These defense postures or stress positions are placating, blaming, being overly reasonable, being irrelevant. So, placating means A, you disagree with all the other family members. B, you pick a favorite family member and agree with him or her. C, you ignore the other family members. And D, you try to please everybody out of fear of rejection. Okay. So placating means you try to please everyone. If you think of placating, you think of pleasing others, right? So you add the out of fear of rejection. The placator is a people pleaser under stress, while the blamer, A, will sacrifice others to feel good about himself. B, will often say, if it weren't for you. C, will point the finger at others to avoid dealing with his or her own issues. And D, all the above are typical behaviors of a blamer. That's all the above, okay? Blamer is looking for someone else to point the finger at beyond themselves. It's not me, it's you. The person who becomes overly reasonable, A, often practice excitation. B, cries a lot during the session. C, is likely to engage in defense mechanism and intellectualization. And D, has a high degree of emotion. So C, is likely to engage in defense mechanism of intellectualization. So someone who's overly reasonable, right? They can come off as cold, right? They can come off sound like sound like a computer pretty much. They keep their emotions in check. So if something scary happens, they're kind of like the person like, okay, let's not overreact. Let's be reasonable. And I'm sure you've heard somebody say, let's be reasonable when it's a really highly emotional situation. Your test can refer to this overly reasonable client as a responsible analyzer. According to Satir, let's try that again. According to Satir, the individual displaying an irrelevant style will distract the family from problem via constantly talking about irrelevant topics. B, will become a people pleaser. C, will analyze the situation more than most. And D, all the above. Okay? A, will distract the family from the problem via constantly talking about other irrelevant topics. So this irrelevant style, when you're in family therapy, you have a person, like one of the clients or family members is like, oh, let's just change the subject. Like we could just move on. Like someone who really just very much dismissive about the actual topic. B, will become a people pleaser. We talked about that with placating. And then we'll analyze the situation more, right? And we just talked about that, right? Talked about that with someone who's overly reasonable. Okay. And remember, you're not going to see questions like with all the above. It will be just one definitive answer for the NCE as well as the CPCE. Virginia Satir is considered a leading figure in experiential family therapy. Blank is sometimes called the dean of experiential family therapy. Lewitt von Butler Leffy. Oh my gosh, that was a name to say. B, Gregory Bateson. C, Carl Whitaker. And D, Mary Boldman. Need some time to try to answer that. And Carl Whitaker. So, looking into Carl Whitaker, okay? Carl Whitaker was fond of saying that experience, not education, challenges family. Experiences go beyond consciousness, according to Whitaker, and the best way to access unconscious is symbolically. Your exam may refer to Whitaker's approach as experimental symbolic family therapy. So, you think of Whitaker, you think of the psychotherapy of the absurd. And I'll tell you why. So he would have, for example, if there was a power struggle between two people in the family, he would tell them to do tug of war, right? So things that are very much paradoxical that you would not do today because you would literally lose your license, okay? Also, Carl Whitaker felt that co-therapists were helpful. He talked about shaping with successive approximation, which means to teach new behaviors and modifying additional behaviors. The goal is to provide reinforcements that are applied in small steps that will allow them to, them or the client to get closer to the desired goal, right? So you would, instead of telling them change your behavior by tomorrow, you would work with them with that target goal of behavior that you desire and allow them to make smaller steps towards that goal. Okay. Paul Whitaker, and also you can think of Whitaker as witty, like absurd. That's how I remember it. But Carl Whitaker's interaction with the family could be best described as A, quiet and empathetic. B, join the family and experience it as if he were a member of the family. C, a reality therapist. And D, a cognitive behavioral therapist. Join the family and experience it as if he was family. Okay. So Whitaker, a psychiatrist by training, internationally minimized the importance of theory, noting that therapeutic interaction is more of an art. Okay. Whitaker, he emphasized that systems are unique and generally not covered in sources and courses that focus only on individual models. Okay. According to Whitaker, a co-therapist is helpful. B, a co-therapist should never be used. C, a co-therapist should be only used with blended families. And D, all above could be true. A co-therapist is helpful. Whitaker felt that co-therapists can provide meaningful feedback and allow the therapist to be an active participant in therapy rather than merely a teacher. Psychotherapy of the absurd is primarily related to the work of A, Virginia Satir. Remember we talked about Virginia Satir. We also have B, Carl Whitaker. C, Maxie Maltby. And D, William Glasser. All right. So Carl Whitaker, right? Remember I said witty, absurd, paradoxical, outside the box. Okay. And also we said Virginia Satir, right? Satir, transformational systematic therapy, experiential therapy as well. Then you have Maxie C. Maltby. He was actually a psychiatrist who coined the term RBT, similar to what is Albert Ellis REBT. Then you have William Glasser, who's reality therapy and choice theory. A behavioristic marriage and family therapist is counseling the entire family together. She turns to the 18-year-old son who's attending community college and says, "You must complete your sociology essay before you can use the family car and go out with your friends." Which therapist is primarily guiding her intervention strategy? A, David Primack's principle or law, Ivan Pavlov, and John B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, or all the above. So David Primack's principle or law. So Primack principle suggests that a family member must complete an unpleasant task, which is a low probability behavior, LPB, before he or she will be allowed to engage in pleasant tasks, also known as HPB, right? So, for example, you have to eat your vegetables before you can get dessert, right? You have to do this in order to get what you really want. And you go back. Ivan Pavlov, you think of puppies, right? You think of the dog, salvation, the bell, the meat, the unconditioned stimulus, conditioned stimulus. What do you know about John B. Watson, right? So John B. Watson. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. He talked about the need of, behaviors being learned. Okay. And let's see, we have B.F. Skinner. Okay. And then B.F. Skinner had the mice and the pellets. And then, of course, as I said earlier, that all the above is not going to be on the exam. And so you want to make sure that you know that. But also, let's get back to John B. Walton. Of course, he did Little Albert, right? Little Albert experiment where he had a child, where he taught the kid how to pretty much be afraid. He said that phobias can be learned, right? And so what he did was he introduced furry animals to the child and allowed the child to have a pleasant experience with the white furry animals, so like the bunny or the mice. And then what he did was he introduced a loud noise, banging noise, and he scared the child. And the child became scared of the furry animals. And without the bell being rung and the furry animals introduced, the child began to get scared at all things that were furry. Okay? So he said that phobias can be learned. Okay? Also known as conditioning. A behavioristic marriage and family counselor is counseling the entire family together. She turns to her 18-year-old son who's attending college and says, I know you like to play golf. Therefore, every time you cut the grass, your father will take you to play golf. I'm going to have you and your dad sign a contract that you agree with this policy, which principle is primarily guided with her strategy. A negative reinforcement. B, thought stopping. C, shaping with successive approximation. And D, quid pro quo. All right, so quid pro quo, right? So quid pro means one thing for another, something for something, this for that. Okay? This technique is generally used with a behavioral contingency contract. So for this one, they said, let's sign this contract and agree on this thing together, right? So that's what the quid pro quo is. Is it always a good one? No. A male is supervising a female counselor for state licensure. He tells her that he will continue to supervise her as long as she has sex with him. This is an example of A, quid pro quo, B, a legal but not ethical violation, C, A and B, and D, none of the above. So we're going to go with A, quid pro quo. So you do this for me, I do that for you. And remember, I said it's not always a good thing. Okay? All right. A behavioristic family counselor suggests that the family chart the number of times the 6-year-old boy Billy says no when he's told to do something. The baseline of the chart would be to refer to as A, the period when positive reinforcement is being implemented, B, the period where negative reinforcement is being implemented, C, the period when quid pro quo is being implemented, D, a period before the behavior modification changes or begins. A period before the behavior modification begins. So basically what you're doing is just getting the baseline of where Billy is with how many times he says no when that situation occurs. So you're looking at patterns so that when you implement that behavioral change, you want to be able to see that it's being effective. And that's how you're able to measure the success of the intervention. Okay. The family counselor explains to Miss Smith that the next time the 9-year-old Sally hits her little brother, she must sit in the family room by herself. The counselor is using A, shaping, B, shaping with successive approximation. And we talked about that, right? You want to change the target behavior, but you implement small steps at a time, right? This is also used in brief therapy. Okay, reciprocity. D, time out and procedure that most behaviorists feel is a form of extension. All right, time out. A procedure that most behaviorists feel is a form of extension. Timeout occurs when a family member, usually a child, is isolated or removed from an environment for a specific period of time, so to ensure that he or she does not receive reinforcement for dysfunctional behaviors. Okay, now do timeout work with kids all the time? No, but this is just what it means. Okay. Miss Chance tells a family therapist that she pays all the bills, does all the cleaning, and brings in 90% of the family's income. Moreover, Miss Chance is convinced that her husband does not appreciate her or show her affection. According to the behaviorist principle of family therapy known as reciprocity, a there is a good chance that Miss Chance will consider leaving the marriage. B, it may seem paradoxical. Nevertheless, Miss Chance will be more committed to making the marriage work. C, it may seem paradoxical. Neither less, Miss Chance will consider leaving the marriage. D, the situation will virtually have no impact on the couple's marriage. All right. There's a good chance that Miss Chance will leave the marriage, okay? It's pretty straightforward. I mean, sounds reasonable. A couple is having sexual problems that stem from anxiety. A marriage counselor who is a strict behaviorist would A, dispute the couple's irrational thinking, B, prescribe thought stopping, C, rely heavily on systematic desensitization procedures, and D, rely primarily on paraphrasing and reflection. Okay. Okay, so C, rely on systematic desensitization procedures. Keyword here is anxiety, right? And think about Joseph Wolf. You think of systematic desensitization, not to be confused with John B. Watson. So Joseph Wolf, he has systematic desensitization, pairs fears of mental imagery with relaxation to eliminate the fear, and of course add relaxation. Okay. He also has what's called the subjective unit distress scale, where you will list those anxieties from least to most anxiety in order, in which you would use the imagery, which is also called in vivo. And then once you have that behavior started to introduce them to that, then you will have vivo exposure. A family counselor noticed that the husband is in a blended family and is having obsessive sexual thoughts about a woman living down the street. A strict behavioralist would most likely A, analyze the man's dreams, B, have him chart the incident of the behavior but do little else, C, practice thought stopping, D, rely primarily on Joseph Wolf's systematic desensitization. Okay. So it's going to be C, thought stopping. Because of course you wouldn't want him to use systematic desensitization because the behavior should not be happening, right? It's morally wrong. It's definitely wrong on so many levels, right? But you want to use thought stopping. So thought stopping is when you have a thought and you tell yourself to stop it, right? You might use like CBT, like telling yourself, these are horrible thoughts, right? You want to stop doing that. And I've also heard that some people, when they try to do thought stopping, if you ever see someone with a rubber band and they pop their hands like that, that's also used in therapy to get yourself back to out of that thinking, and you'll pop the rubber band on your wrist every time that happens. Okay, so it's like a stimulus. You secure a job as an executive director of a family counseling agency. As you go through your files, you discover that 5 years before you took the job, the agency selected 100 families and counseled them using strict behaviorist models. Agency took the next group of 100 families and counseled them using Satir's experimental conjoint family therapy model. Each family received 12 sessions of therapy, and each family took before and after assessment that accurately depicted how well the family was functioning. You decide to run a t-test, right? T-test is when you're comparing two groups or more, right? Mainly two groups. So think of T, think of two, so two groups, to examine whether or not statistically significant difference is evident between the two approaches. And in this case, you have two approaches, so you use a t-test. A, an ex post facto. B, a casual comparative or ex post facto. C, true experiment, or C, a sample survey research. Okay. So casual comparative ex post facto, after the research, after the fact. So this is important because all the research was already done, right? All you're doing is gathering all the information from that previous research and you're putting it into a t-test table to examine whether or not there is a statistically, oh my gosh, I can't speak, statistically significant difference that's evident between the two approaches, right? Okay. Since the research occurred in the past and the researcher did not have control over the independent variables, this qualifies as a casual comparative search. The fact that a t-test was used will allow you to eliminate choice A and D, okay? Got a little bit of research going on here. I know, calm down. All of the techniques listed below will be used by behaviorist family therapists except A, family sculpting, B, functional analysis of behavior followed by operant conditioning, C, modeling, D, chaining and extension. So family sculpting. Family sculpting, popularized by Virginia Satir, is an experimental expressive technique in which family members places other family members in positions that symbolize their relationship with other members of the family. So, for example, if you have them do the family sculpting, you will look at where they see themselves in relationship to the family. So maybe they will feel closer to that family member or they don't feel as close, right? Just depends on where they do that with the family sculpting. Okay. So once that happens, this helps the therapist understand family dynamics that might be missing from a mere discussion of the family issues. So it's another way of gathering information. Which statement is true of families? A, the divorce rate has decreased markedly in the last several years. B, remarriage today is uncommon. C, remarriage today is common. And D, the divorce rate in the United States hovers at about 10%. Just FYI, when you think about family behavioral therapy, which is also known as FBT, focuses on optimizing thoughts and behaviors through performing programming that typically consists of 12 to 16 outpatient sessions, approximately 60 to 90 minutes, okay, that are scheduled to occur for 4 to 6 months at a time. Yeah. Give you a couple of seconds to choose your answer. Which statement is true of families? Remarriage is common today. Okay? Remarriage is almost as common as marriage. Surprise, surprise. Approximately half of all marriage includes remarriage for one partner, and about 20% of all marriages, both parties are getting remarried. Which statement is true? A single life is short-lived for divorced persons. About 30% of all divorced persons are remarried within 12 months of being divorced. B, most persons who are divorced do not remarry. C, most persons who are divorced wait a minimum of 5 years to remarry. D, women remarry quicker, however, men do not. Okay. A single life is short-lived for divorced persons. About 30% of all divorced persons are remarried within 12 months of being divorced. Okay. Some experts forecast that in the 21st century, step families may outnumber traditional families. I can see how that can be. All right. The theory of psychodynamic, and remember, two families is called what? Conjoint family therapy. Okay. The theory of psychodynamic family counseling is primarily associated with William Glasser, Sigmund Freud, Virginia Satir and Carl Whitaker, and Nathan Ackerman, D. All right. Nathan Ackerman. All right. So, Nathan Ackerman, unlike many family therapists, was concerned with the internal feelings and thoughts of each individual as well as the dynamics between them. Okay. Prior to Ackerman, it was considered inappropriate to include family members in analytic treatment sessions. So, although Freud is a father of psychoanalysis, it was Ackerman, an analytically trained child therapist who was early in 1938 recommended studying the family and not just the child, right? So this is where we go back and we look at childhood, we look at the unconsciousness. So that was introduced when in 1938. Okay. And then we go back, we think about William Glasser, reality therapy, Sigmund Freud, right? Psychosexual stages, Virginia Satir, STST, right? Satir, transformational, right? Systematic therapy. We have Carl Whitaker, very much witty. The psychotherapy of the absurd, okay? And then Nathan Ackerman. In psychoanalytic family therapy, the word object means A dream, B, a significant other with whom a child wishes to bond, C, transference, and then D, counter transference. So B, a significant other with whom a child wishes to bond, right? Object of my affection, object of my love, my life, right? They have that special attachment with. This is the notion that an individual or individual's ego attempts to establish a relationship with an object, often a person or a part of the body, to satisfy their needs. Okay. When this does not occur, anxiety is manifested. Okay. Then we think about a dream, we think about Sigmund Freud, right? Manifest and latent, right? Transference is with the client. And counter transference, what you think of the COUN, counselor, is with the counselor. In psychoanalytic family therapy, the term introject really means that the client, A, internalize the positive and negative characteristics of objects within themselves. B, possesses internalized verbalization. C, possesses a finite number of problem-solving options. D, possess internal motivation to solve his or her own difficulties. Right. So internalize positive and negative characteristics of objects within themselves. Okay. Eventually, those introjects, taking in personality attributes of others, become a part of your own self-image, right? So it's an internal dialogue that we have of what has been said to us that like replays in our mind over and over and over again. So you think of introject, you think of internal dialogue. And it's also determined how we as individuals relate to others because of that internal dialogue. Pick the best examples of psychoanalytic concept of splitting. A client who realistically perceives her therapist as a very empathetic person. B, a client who realistically perceives her therapist as only having good qualities. And C, a client who sees her therapist as all bad. Or B and C. We're going to go with B and C, right? You see a person all good or all bad, right? There is no gray area. Splitting occurs when the client sees an object, another person, as either all good or all bad. Splitting allows one to keep anxiety in check by making objects predictable. This tendency begins in childhood, usually by characterizing one's mother as all good or all bad. Removing dysfunctional introjects from childhood is curative. Okay. A 72-year-old woman you are counseling in a family reminds you of your mother and is bringing up unresolved childhood issues for you as a counselor. This is an example of A, positive transference, B, negative transference, C, countertransference, or D, ambivalent transference. Remember I said COU, counselor transference, right? If you never heard the word ambivalent transfer, it pretty much compromises the positive as well as a negative hostile attitude towards the therapist. So it's actually happens during the transference process from a client. Ambivalent transference comes from the client. A family member actually changes the structure of their family system. According to Walslick, Weekland, and Fisk, the family has achieved A, second order change that is more desirable than the first order change. B, first order change that is more desirable than the second order change. C, mediation. G, Greek chorus. So if you had to select which ones to eliminate first, I'm hoping you talking about C and D. Okay. Let's find out the answer. A second order change is more desirable than the first one. So, as I mentioned before, the second order change, right, is what a family has been putting in place that has not been working. It's temporary, right? It always go right back to the way it was. And then you have, well, I got that backwards. So second order change is something that's more desirable because you change the behavior or you change a response of some sort, right? And now it's working long term than the first order change of what you had prior, like before therapy, right? A woman sees her husband as all good sometimes and all bad at others. An analytically trained family therapist who believes in object relations would see this as A, ambivalent transference, B, splitting, C, dysthymia, D, psychotic behavior. So I'm hoping you chose splitting. We talked about that. It's all good or all bad. If you think about dysthymia, you think about the MSC, like how someone presents, right? Dysthymic, okay? Psychotic behavior. All right. Nathan Ackerman is considered a famous psychoanalytic family therapist. So are A. Carl Rogers and Albert Ellis, B. Arnold Lazarus and Joseph Wolfe, C. William Glasser and Robert Woobling, D. James Framo and Robin Skinner. Not to be confused with Skinner. Okay. Nathan Ackerman, okay, is considered a famous analytic family therapist. So are James Farino and Robert Skinner. Rogers is person-centered. Elias is rational emotive behavioral therapy. Lazarus is multimodal therapy with basic ID. Wolf is systematic desensitization. And Glasser and Wobbling is reality therapy. So you think of Framo, believe that important objects, usually parents, often fuel love and hate feelings in kids. The more pathological the earlier the earlier life experiences are, the more the person will, as an adult, have the same relationships that fit that internal love hate scenario from their childhood. Okay. Chloe Mundanes and Jay Holly are associated with the blank school of counseling, of family counseling. A, strategic, B, behavioral, C, psychodynamic, and D, object relations. So strategic, okay? Chloe Mandanes, and Jay Haley. Haley is a name we associated most with this area. Haley was impacted by the great late Milton Erickson, who believed in designing a strategy for each specific problem. It has been said that Haley helped alter Eric's work so that it helped families as much as individuals. Haley coined the term strategic family therapy to explain Erickson's methods. When Haley began investigating psychotherapy, remember, he's a he, was a he. A was already trained as Freudian analyst, like so many other pioneers in the field. B was already trained as a behaviorist. C studied REBT with Ellis. And D had a degree in arts and communication rather than helping professions. All right. So D had a degree in the arts and communication rather than helping professions. Okay. Jay Haley believed in giving clients directives. You are counseling a family during the session. The 14-year-old daughter exclaims that she is suicidal. The best example of directive would be A, you turn to your 14-year-old daughter and say, you seem to be saying that living is too painful. B, you turn to your 14-year-old daughter and say, could it be that you want to hurt yourself because your boyfriend no longer wishes to see you? C, you turn to the family and say, if your daughter threatens suicide this week, I want the entire family, including your daughter, to stay home and nobody leaves for the day. D, you turn to the family and say, could this be a family problem rather than difficulty for your daughter? Okay. You turn to your daughter and family. You turn to your family and say, if your daughter threatens suicide this week, I want the entire family, including your daughter, to stay home and nobody leaves the house for that day. Okay. A directive or prescription is when the therapist tells the client or family what to do, right? Which of these responses is the best example of double-blind concept used in J. Haley's strategic therapy? You are trying to help a client stop smoking. You hypnotize her and tell her she will never smoke another cigarette again. After you waken her, you abolish her to smoke as many cigarettes as she can fit in 3 days. B. You recommend the client chart the number of cigarettes she smokes. C. You tell her to mentally verbalize herself as a non smoker whenever she has the desire to smoke, or all the above. So A, you hypnotize her and tell her she will never smoke another cigarette again. After you waken her, you may abolish her to smoke as many cigarettes as she can. So a double bind is a no-win situation characterized by contradictory messages such as never smoke again and then smoke as much as you want. It constitutes a paradox in the sense that the client is told that he or she can engage in behavior that the person wishes to abate. Okay? The directive or prescription given to a smoker in the previous question could be described as a paradoxical intervention, a cognitive intervention, an object relations intervention, a behavioral intervention. Paradoxical, right? Tell them tell them to do one thing and then tell them to do the opposite again, right? A directive is usually a therapeutic task or a command. When a person follows a paradoxical directive, the symptoms are under therapeutic control. So if the client in the previous question called the counselor and said, "Hey, I hypnotized me and I to smoke 5 cigarettes after the session," the therapist could remark, "Well, of course you did. I told you to do and smoke as many cigarettes as you could." Okay. A couple tells a therapist using strategic family therapy that they have a quarrel at least once every evening. Therapist says, "Between now and next time, I want to see you have a serious quarrel at least twice every evening." The goal of this is to have them realize that they have power over when they quarrel, like when they argue, and that they can make changes towards doing that. So it's A, relabeling, which is commonly used in this form of therapy. B, reframing, which is commonly used in this form of therapy, prescribing the symptom. D, a directive that is non-paradoxical or double bind. We can already rule out D because we said, this is a directive, and this is also paradoxical, right? So you're prescribing the symptom. Do what is the biggest problem, and you'll see how ridiculous it is and how you could solve it. Strategic family counselors often rely on relabeling or reframing. A client says his girlfriend yells at him every time he engages in a certain behavior. The best example of reframing or relabeling would be a counselor who reminds or remarks. Research seems to show that when she yells at you, it's because she loves you so much. And women often feel foolish if she hugs and kisses you in a situation like that. B, a counselor who remarks, "Can you tell me about it in the present moment?" as if she's yelling at you at this very minute. C, a counselor who remarks, "You are upset by her verbal assaults." D, a counselor who remarks, "Are you really hurt by what your girlfriend's remarks? Or is it the fact that you are telling yourself how catastrophic it is that she said all these things?" Okay, so A, right? Reframing occurs when you redefine a situation in a more positive context, right? The situation is described as a positive light to evoke a different emotional response. Ooh, I gave you the answer already. But anywho, in strategic family counseling, the person who has the power in the family has authority and makes the rules to enforce them. Remember, I talked about with strategic family therapy is that the goal is to identify the mom or the dad, whoever the caregivers are, and note that there's imbalance of power, and that's where you have issues, right? Psychoanalytic practitioners do not attack symptoms directly. Strategic therapy does not attack the symptoms directly either. B is pragmatic and often focuses on abating symptoms. Okay. C does not take the position on whether a counselor should attempt to ameliorate symptoms or not. D takes the position that if you can change each family member's unconsciousness, then the symptoms will gradually disappear. Okay. Right? It's pragmatic, often focused on abating symptoms, right? In the here and now, let's focus on what the issue is, right? And start making solution. You could think of solution folks focus therapy. Okay. Chloe Mundanes insists that symptoms serve a function. A child, for example, sees that her mother is depressed. The daughter throws a glass up on the floor to break it. This brings her mother out of her depressed state and makes her mother angry and powerful. This is known as okay, incongruence hierarchy, right? Usually the mom is in control, but here the daughter is, okay? Mundanes advocated pretend techniques that are somewhat paradoxical. An example might be a child who has panic attacks pretends he has a mental bullhorn in his head and shouts stop. A child who has a panic attack pretends in his mind that the therapist is counseling him. See, a child who has panic attacks pretends his dad is a therapist during the actual family therapy session. And D, a child who has panic attack pretends to have one during the session and the parents pretend to help him. Okay, so it's going to be D. And pretending, the family enacts make-believe scenarios of the problem, okay, of the problem. Most experts maintain that the pretend technique is more gentle and less confrontational and traditional than paradoxical interventions. Last one here. A strategic family therapist says to a family, I don't know what else you can do to stop the bickering and fighting in your house. This is an example of A, restraining, B, quid pro quo, C, pretending, D, interpretation. Restraining. In restraining, the therapist may warn the family or individual about the negative consequences of change. The counselor might tell the family to take it slow or expect a relapse. Restraining happens or helps overcome resistance by suggesting that it might be better if the family does not change. Okay? So I hope this has been informational for you just to go through them. And it helps. I did want to talk about Salvador Minuchin. He's a father of structural family therapy. He addresses problems within the family by charting the relationships between the family members or between the subsets of family. Okay. He says there has to be more than love to change a family. His goal is to improve the interactions between family members since dysfunctional family relationships can create stress and natural mental health problems for every member of the family. Okay. The technique that he uses mapping, right? Mapping is where you would place everyone almost like a family tree. Okay. The structure of the family is to establish new family rules, is to use what's called joining the family, boundary making, okay, and role play. All right, thank you all so much for spending this time with me. I really, truly do appreciate it, and I hope that this was helpful and that you were able to learn something today. I am also working on some stuff that I'll be posting soon. After this video, you'll be able to look at the next section that I'm going to do. It's going to be groups. The link should be coming up right now, or if it's not already there, and you will go right to that in-depth review. But make sure you like and subscribe and share.